The Oort Perimeter, Chapter 6. Alfred looked over the tactical reports for the afternoon and shook his head. Randy has done a lot of stupid things in the past in the name of research, but this is ridiculous, he said with a hint of frustration. Commander Eric is fairly put off about this too, sir, said an officer in front of him. Alfred tossed the data pad onto his desk and said, I can imagine. I'm surprised he didn't put a torpedo through their bridge just out of spite. Well, either way, what those idiots did needs to be dealt with. I'm sick and tired of their cowboy testing methods. I want Captain Ullman here, in front of my desk, in the next 15 minutes, no excuses. This nonsense ends today, period. The officer saluted, and said, Yes, sir. As the officer slipped out of the office, Alfred picked up another data pad and studied it. He grinned. So it would seem that the Chancellor's decision to isolate our Syrian visitors on Pluto Station was a wise choice. Well, it should be interesting to see how this develops. Just then his communicator beeped. Pressing his ear, he said, This is Admiral Bofenheiser. Admiral, this is Bentley from production. I just wanted to let you know that we're going to be a couple weeks late delivering the last of the SHIELD satellites for the barrier. Alfred rubbed his forehead in frustration. You're already 2 months behind now, Bentley. What's the holdup this time? Well, we're having problems creating sufficient quantities of the alloys we need. What's causing the delay in production? We don't know, but it looks like it's the processes used to create them. Then update the processes, said Alfred with a hint of frustration. Well, we're working on that, but in the meantime we've slowed down production in order to ensure that all of the alloy produced is of the best quality. Alfred sighed heavily. Fine. Just get things straightened out over there, and do it soon. The Grand Admiral would like to have the rest of the perimeter upgrades done in the next 30 days. Understood, Sir. Bentley out. Alfred shook his head. Sometimes I wish I could just delegate this whole stupid perimeter upgrade project to someone else. But it's too important to us, and Mike especially, to trust its completion to anyone else. He leaned back in his chair and thought for several moments, and then smiled. Well, at least I'm not entertaining a large group of overgrown bats. He soon sat up, grabbed another data pad, leaned back in his chair again and began to read. But as he did, his mind wandered back to the SHIELD array and Bentley's comments. He eventually set the data pad down and mulled things over in his mind for several minutes. Eventually he got up from his chair, grabbed 2 other data pads, and made his way out of his office. As he passed his secretary's desk, he said, Ensign, I'm going to visit the main production facility and talk with Mr. Bentley about the SHIELD array. When Captain Ulm gets here, tell him to take a seat and wait for me. He is not to leave under any circumstances. I'll be back to deal with him later. Understood? The secretary nodded. Aye, sir. Alfred pressed his ear, and said, Call transporter system. When a soft computer voice answered him, asking for his desired destination, he said, Production, please. Location within production, asked the computer. Somewhere near Mr. Bentley will suffice. Acknowledged. Moments later a grayish sphere of energy appeared briefly, and then vanished, leaving nothing behind. Pendleton walked casually through the main avenue of the alien market on the western promenade of Pluto Station and scanned a multitude of shops and species around him as they bartered, wheeled and dealed in a variety of goods and services. Wynne and Martin followed not far behind him. Just ahead of them was Eric. They'd followed him onto the station only in order to keep an eye on him. Not because he was doing anything bad, but simply because he was so tired, as well as frustrated at recent events, so they wanted to be sure he was all right. They watched him carefully as he moved with a purpose through the sizable crowds filling the area, and over to a food stand operated by a concessionaire who looked not unlike a dung beetle. 1 cup of your special blend, please, said Eric, his voice rough and groggy. Absolutely, sir. Only the best for my finest customer, clicked the beetle. The concessionaire moved his multitude of arms across his cart in a symphony of motion as he prepared the drink. A few minutes later a steaming hot cup of what looked like coffee appeared from his cart. Eric took out a pair of galactic credits and handed them to the beetle, and then took his drink. He put his nose over the cup and inhaled deeply, taking in the rich, delicious, fragrant odor the drink gave off, savoring it briefly before taking a sip and happily basking in the bold, powerful flavor. Pendleton, on the other hand, was disgusted by this and covered his nose as the odor hit him like a truck. "Ah, man. That's just wrong on so many levels, dude. How can you drink that stuff? I'm getting sick just smelling it," he protested. Eric grinned. "Hey, don't knock it until you've tried it. This stuff is better than anything you can get from Earth, or the commissary," he said. Pendleton looked at the beetle-like concessionaire, carefully noting what he was using to brew the drink Eric was enjoying. He eventually walked over to the cart and took special interest in a large bowl that was sitting on top of it. Inside the bowl was a bean-like substance that was the secret ingredient the insectoid was using to make his special blend beverage. To Pendleton's disgust and horror, he watched as one of the beans rolled over and crawled out of the bowl and onto the cart. He picked it up and studied it with disbelief. Immediately the concessionaire snatched it out of his hand and tossed it back in the bowl. "Do not touch my beans. They are the secret ingredient in my coffee," he protested. Pendleton grimaced. "Dude, they're freaking bugs, man. How can you feed people this stuff? That's just disgusting," he protested. The insectoid pointed at Eric and said, "He enjoys it." Pendleton snorted. "Yeah, and he's weird enough that he would." Martin chuckled. "Says the guy who likes Bakelmarga," she quipped. Pendleton pointed a finger at her and said, "Hey, don't knock it till you've tried it. I happen to love that stuff, even though it looks disgusting." The insectoid concessionaire crossed several of his arms and twitched his mandibles. "You like Bakelmarga, and yet you call my coffee disgusting? Well now, aren't we the red-shelled snipper?" he said. Pendleton glared at him. "Hey, stay out of this, bug face." The others laughed. The insectoid merely fluttered his carapace. "So what are we doing over here?" asked one. Pendleton turned slightly, and said, keeping an eye on the commander. "He's been a little weird lately." "You mean more than usual?" chided Martin. Pendleton tilted his head slightly and shrugged. "Well, you're not exactly wrong." He then turned and looked at Eric, who appeared to have changed 180 degrees, appearing far more calm and much perkier than before as the previously obvious signs of exhaustion melted from his face. Pendleton cocked an eyebrow slightly. "If that stuff brought him around that fast, I might be tempted to try a cup of it someday," he thought. However, this made him cringe a little. "Well, if I can get past the stench of it, that is," he continued. He then watched as Eric turned and made his way further down the promenade. The other three soon followed. "Where do you think he's going?" asked Martin. "With him?" "Who knows," muttered Pendleton. They followed Eric further down the promenade towards an open area where species from all across the galaxy gathered to discuss everything from politics to the latest items they had for sale or trade. Some of them were avians, some insectoids, others were similar to wolves or cats, while still others were almost fish-like in appearance. Some of them wore environment suits or heavy winter jackets, while others walked around in nothing more than their natural fur coats. What impressed him the most was how many of them were from the 9 ancient races, including those from the 4 that hated Earth, and had gone to great lengths to convince the United Galactic Worlds, otherwise known as the UGW, a type of United Nations for the galaxy, to restrict all humans to soul space, fearing that they might eventually do something stupid, like conquering the galaxy. Yet here, members of those same races got along with humans with no problem. It was as though trade and money trumped galactic politics and xenophobia. So long as there was money to be made, they'd keep coming here and doing business with the society, and all the other races that were gathered there, just as they had for the past 2 centuries. If nothing else, this provided the society with a means by which to openly interact with the rest of the galaxy, despite the many restrictions and prohibitions that had been put on them by the UGW. As Pendleton walked along, he paused slightly as he spotted Eric approaching one of the traders who did business on the main promenade. His eyes narrowed. "What's he up to?" asked Martin. "I don't know," said Pendleton suspiciously. Just then he watched the traitor slip Eric something almost so inconspicuously that nobody would have seen it had they not been paying attention. Pendleton frowned. "What in the world are you up to?" he said quietly. "I am curious about your people who live on your homeworld. You say that you are trying to advance them to a point where they can be introduced to your technology without risk of harm to their culture. Yet I have heard that they are already beginning to consider such ideas on their own," said Sirder, the chief Syrian diplomat. Nordum smiled. "Who do you think gave them those ideas?" "You did," said Sirder in surprise. Nordum nodded. "There are many of our people spread out among their nations, working with them either directly, or from the shadows, in an effort to advance their technology to a level near or equal to our own. It was decided in the early 1940s, during World War II, that we needed to take an active role in helping them rise above their primitive, self-interested lives and evolve into a more civilized and advanced society. The medium we chose for that effort was their rapidly growing information and media infrastructures. These included comic books, movies, newspapers, television, and much more. Through these mediums we've introduced the concepts necessary to help them accept each of these new ideas, slowly acclimating them to better ways of thinking in order to prepare them for the day when we will eventually introduce ourselves to them." "But isn't that a direct violation of your law of first contact you claim to cherish and abide by?" Nordum shook his head. "Not really. The seeds of such change were already there. We simply watered and nurtured them by providing the ideas and means to advance, and the encouragement to do so. From there they did the rest on their own. We still periodically inject new technology and ideas into their society to help them along, but only when and where necessary." "What if they reject your ideas?" Nordum shrugged. "If they're not willing to advance on their own, then they simply remain where they're at until they are. We will not force them to change. But we do encourage them to continue forward, despite their reservations." "Then you do follow your law of first contact?" Nordum nodded. "We do, to the best of our ability, and in our own unique way." "Then is all their current technology of your design?" Nordum shrugged. "Some is, some isn't. There are a few things we can claim direct responsibility for, but those were only for the purpose of moving them forward in an area where they'd become stagnant, or had stopped advancing." "Interesting. So was the society's advancement assisted in the same way that you were helping them to grow?" "Initially no, but it most certainly was after we first stepped into space. As you know, the Gaelic Von were a major contributor to our rise as a spacefaring culture. But, once they'd given us the foothold we required, the rest we achieved on our own, even surpassing the incredible technology of our benefactors. Some of that, though, was brought on by necessity, as our early interactions with the Juna did not go well, resulting in our making some very powerful enemies in our infancy whom we found ourselves unable to defeat. Hence our push for greater, more powerful technologies to ensure our survival. Without having done this we'd all likely be Juna slaves, scattered far and wide throughout the galaxy." Sirder folded his ears back, clearly not pleased with the accusations being leveled against his employers. But he soon composed himself. "So what have you offered the people of your world since becoming an active part in their advancement?" he continued. "There are quite a few things, actually. Far too many to list. However, there are some you may recognize, such as warp drive, hyperdrive, FTL flight, shields, galactic government, wormholes, transporters and other such things. Some of the ideas we've shared with them have found physical form, while others are still only concepts in their society. However, in time, we're certain even those ideas will become reality." The diplomat gave Nordum a sly, toothy grin. "Then they are moving in the direction you wish them to?" "Not exactly. But they're, at the least, making progress in the right direction. Well, for the most part anyways. They still suffer from many of the same problems as before, such as fear, lust, greed and a desire for power that kept them stagnant for many millennia. As you may know, the 9 ancient races didn't suffer from these failings in their early days, and thus prospered greatly, growing rapidly for centuries until they achieved a level that properly satisfied all of their needs. Only then did they stagnate technologically. We, on the other hand, are quite the opposite, as our ancestors clung tightly to the old ways, never desiring to improve, unless forced to, and always wanting to remain in their comfortable little cocoons, hating change and doing all they could to fight it. In many cases they even killed those who stepped outside the shell of acceptable society in order to delay the future they knew would eventually come. Those that escaped this persecution gathered together for strength, eventually leading to the creation of the Braeburn Society, which was the foundation for what we are today. The diplomat looked curiously at Nordum. If your numbers had grown such that you could form an alliance for strength, why could you not use that same strength to change your homeworld for the better? Because, we're not tyrants, and therefore we will not force our will upon others. We'll encourage, coax and sometimes prod, but ultimately it's up to those who are being pushed to either move, or stay put. We will not force them. We learned early on that pushing people faster than they're ready to move can prove to be very destructive. Every time we did, they fought back, and many of our brethren died as a result. That's why we eventually adopted a coax, but don't force policy. Even then it wasn't enough, as we were repeatedly attacked for our forward-thinking ways. This eventually led to our being compelled to seek refuge on the continent of North America, and eventually space, to escape this endless persecution. Among the stars we're not limited to the confines of a far less polite and understanding society. Here we can explore science, and expand our minds, without boundaries or limits, ever improving ourselves, and those around us. The only thing we ask of our people is that they do nothing that may lead to the harm of another. Sirder cocked his head in curiosity. I find that statute to be intriguing, given that you have one of the most powerful fleets in the region, if not the entire galaxy, he said. Nordum grinned sheepishly. That was not our original desire. We've only become this strong by necessity, not desire. If we'd had our way, we'd have already cast off our fleet and lived at peace with all races. However, there are many within the galaxy, much as there are upon our own homeworld, who will stop at nothing to ensure our extinction. Or, at the very least, our exploitation and enslavement. Thus, we maintain our small, but powerful fleet, to ensure our current and future safety, as well as freedom. Then your fleet is merely for self-protection? Nordum nodded. It is. But why? You have the sworn protection of the Gaiac Vaughn and many others. Are they not sufficient to ensure your safety? Asked Sirder. No, they are not. While we appreciate all that they've done for us, and are still doing, they're only one race among many thousands, even if they are one of the 9. Plus, it would be irresponsible of us not to at least do our part, however feeble it may be, to ensure our own safety. In a way, it's similar to what one of our famous ancestors once said. He who does not carry his own sword, even though he have 1,000 legions by his side, is a fool and deserves whatever death fate may bring him. So, in a way, our fleet is our sword, and the Gaiac Vaughn, and all those who protect us, are our 1,000 legions. Sirder grinned. Well said, and comforting to know. Nordum cocked an eyebrow at this. How so? He asked. There are many within the galaxy who see your sword as something much greater than it is. It is reassuring to know that it is not as dangerous as some might believe. Nordum smirked. I wish everyone believed as you do. Unfortunately, they do not, as our intentions are regularly misconstrued. As such, many needlessly fear us, and because of that, even though our fleet is but small and feeble in comparison to the vast armadas of the galaxy, they seek diligently to bring about our destruction in order to assuage that fear. And yet, we are a threat to no one. Especially not the 9, nor any of those under their care. Sirder grinned slyly. That is a good thing, and should be reassuring to you. You have also done much to put my mind at rest. Nordum was intrigued at this. How so? He asked. When I first came here, my image of your people was one of hostile barbarians bent on galactic domination. I see that I was wrong. And how do you see us now? Asked Nordum. As someone who seeks knowledge before war, and wisdom over conquest. You are not a race to be feared, but rather one to be embraced. Nordum bowed slightly. I thank you for your kind words. But what you have said is only partially true. There are many on Earth who still carry a desire for blood. Sirder nodded. Yes, but they are not the ones to be feared. You are. As one of our ancient philosophers once said, it is not the one who growls in the corner that you must fear, but rather he who stands before you with a sword. Those on your homeworld who seek blood, but have no means by which to gain it, are those who growl in the corner. But you have a great sword, therefore it is you whom we should fear. However, if we need not fear you, then we need not fear them either. Nordum grinned. That's an interesting way to look at it. Sirder smiled slyly. Even creatures such as ourselves possess great wisdom, of which we generously bestow to others from time to time for their enlightenment. Nordum bowed slightly. And it is a wisdom we most graciously accept. Eric strolled into Grog's tavern and sat down at the bar as a large, squid-like creature in a water-filled glass helmet sat behind it mixing drinks. Hey, Grog, what's up? Asked Eric. Me fine. You? Drink, said the creature. Eric took a piece of paper out of his pocket and slid it across the counter to him. Not this time. I'm here for information. Do you, by chance, know anything about this? He asked. Grog studied it with his gigantic, pearl-colored eyes, reading the strange script-like language that was scribbled on it. He then cautiously studied the other patrons. A poodle-like waitress soon scurried over to him and laid a drink order on the bar. I need these as soon as you can, sweetie, she said, her tail wagging gleefully. I make quickly, he grunted, almost caveman style. Thanks, Cheeks, said the waitress with a wink as she hurried away. Grog then briefly turned his eyes to the paper again before snatching it with one of his tentacles and making it disappear. He then reached into a drawer under his sink, fished around briefly, and soon produced something that looked like an old hotel key. Second floor, Section 2. Green box. You find there, he said. Eric took the key and tucked it into a pocket on his jacket. Thanks, Grog, I appreciate it. He then turned and slipped out of the bar. As he passed by the door, Pendleton, Martin and Wynne stood nearby and studied him in disbelief. First he talks to that weird star trader, and now he's consorting with Grog. Man, this gets weirder by the minute, said one. Yeah, and I intend to get to the bottom of this before something crazy happens. Well, crazier than usual, said Pendleton. The three then hurried off in pursuit of their commander, trying not to be seen, but also working to keep up as Eric hustled through the station. He eventually came to an elevator and took it down to the second lowest level in the station, where he got off and made his way down a nearby hallway. Pendleton and the others took another elevator down to the same floor. They soon caught up to him as he was entering one of the long-term storage rooms that was often used to store items that were purchased by fleet personnel from any of the numerous traders who came through the station, but were unable to be immediately retrieved due to various reasons. Usually this was because the items required inspection before they would be allowed into the inner system to avoid letting hazardous or contraband items into Sol proper either by intent or accident. Eric walked slowly down the tall aisles of storage boxes stacked as much as 2 stories tall, and studied each of the registries one by one as he looked for a box with a specific marking on it, one that he knew all too well, but nobody else would understand. Finding what he was looking for, he entered his security ID into one of the registry terminals. This, in turn, activated an arm that retrieved a box that was stashed in one of the piles, and set it down in front of him on a nearby inspection table. He carefully inserted the key into the box and turned it. He then heard a gentle click and watched as the lid popped open. He then lifted it carefully and studied the contents in detail. He soon smiled. Ah, about time you got here, he said. Dealing in contraband, are we? Said Pendleton as he stepped out of the shadows. Eric nearly jumped out of his shoes in surprise. He then quickly slammed the box shut as he caught sight of Pendleton, Wynne and Martin approaching him. What are you three doing down here? He said in surprise. Pendleton crossed his arms and frowned. apparently watching you be an idiot." "What?" said Eric in confusion. "You heard me. We've been watching you go all 007 on us ever since you got your cup of bug coffee. Now what's this all about, and what's in that box that has you sneaking around all super secret like you are?" Eric pursed his lips in frustration. "I can't tell you." "Why not?" Eric glanced at Wen, who cocked an eyebrow in confusion. He then pointed at him. "Because, it's his." Wen did a double take. "Mine. I don't have anything to do with this," he protested. Eric gave him an incredulous gaze and then motioned with his head towards Martin. At first Wen didn't get the message, but soon caught on. "Oh! Is it really here?" he asked excitedly. Pendleton looked at him in confusion. "Wait a second. What do you mean, is it here?" he asked. "He's talking about what's in the box. I was hoping to sneak it onto the ship and give it to him privately so he could surprise her with it, but you guys unintentionally ruined that plan. So I guess he may as well give it to her now," said Eric. Martin looked at the other three in confusion. "Give me what?" she asked. Wen took the box from Eric, opened it, and showed its contents to Martin. Her eyes grew 10 sizes larger as she realized what she was looking at. "No way," she squealed in surprise. "Is this?" Wen nodded. "You've been telling me for months how much you'd like one. But since we work together all the time, and you run the comm station, I knew I couldn't just buy you one, because you'd find out too easily. So I had the commander do it for me. As you can see, he's got lots of people who can help him without ruining the surprise." Martin squealed with joy and gave Wen a great big hug, as well as a sloppy wet kiss. It made Eric grin and chuckle slightly. Pendleton watched this and was intrigued. "So all of this cloak and dagger stuff was just to get her a surprise gift?" he asked. "Well, there's that, and the fact that what he got her is nigh on impossible for anyone but flag officers to get a hold of without throwing up a bunch of red flags. So he confided in me about it, and I then took it up the chain of command until someone gave me clearance to get one for him. I then had it smuggled in with the intent of giving it to him at some point so he could surprise her with it," said Eric. Pendleton watched as Wen and Martin kissed again. He cocked an eyebrow. "I'd say she's thoroughly surprised. But, isn't it against regulations for them to be fraternizing like this? I mean, she's an officer and he's just a gun bunny. Oh, stuff a sock in it, Joel. The two of them clearly love each other, so I'm content to leave things as they are, and you should be too. Besides, the Grand Admiral doesn't have any issues with it, so why should we?" Pendleton merely pursed his lips in disapproval and grunted. Eric laughed. "You're always the party pooper, aren't you?" he said. Pendleton grinned sarcastically. "Hey, someone has to." Alfred walked down a long hallway filled with men in white lab coats, some with hair, some without, some with safety goggles, and others with different styles of hats, but each one on a mission of their own. He felt like the odd duck of the group, so strikingly out of place in his military uniform among a sea of white-clad workers. He grinned slightly as he thought about all of the raw brain power passing by him in the hallway. He soon rounded a corner and headed towards a door marked Foundry. As the door opened, his ears were assaulted by the roar of machinery as his nose was simultaneously attacked by the smell of hot metals and ozone. He put his fingers in his ears as he held his breath against the odors. To one side of the room sat a control booth, inside of which stood two men in white jackets who appeared to be screaming at each other. Alfred's eyes narrowed as he turned and approached the booth. Slipping inside, he spotted Bentley talking with a man who sat behind the control panel for the robotic forge. "I'm telling you, the part is faulty and needs to be replaced," shouted Bentley. "No, it doesn't. It's brand new," replied the man. "I don't care if it's brand new or not. If it doesn't work right, replace it. It's not the unit. It's your stupid alloy. The alloy formula hasn't changed since we began this project 8 years ago. If the formula isn't broken, then it's got to be the forge. The forge has worked correctly this whole time. Nothing's changed." "Yes, it has. Your forge is broken, and I've already told you what needs to be fixed." So either fix it, or I'll get someone down here who will fix it. I need more alloy in order to finish building these shield nodes, and your stubborn stupidity is hindering my work by producing a substandard quality product. The man crossed his arms and stared defiantly at Bentley. I'm telling you, nothing's broken. Now hike your 2-bit arrogant butt out of here and let me do my job. Bentley clenched his fists and growled angrily at the man. You know, this is exactly the reason I'm behind. It's this incompetence of yours. Your attitude isn't exactly helping things any, said Alfred. Bentley spun around in surprise. Admiral. What are you doing here? Alfred shrugged. I had time to kill, and a subordinate to sweat, so I came over to check on you and find out what the holdup was, said Alfred. It's certainly not me, nor is it the fault of my forge. It's this whole stupid alloy of his. It's an utter joke. He'd rather complain about my equipment malfunctioning, which it most certainly is not, instead of realizing that the whole problem is his formula. It looks like it was written by a monkey, said the forge operator. A monkey? A monkey, screamed Bentley. Gentlemen, please. I'm more worried about getting the last of these nodes finished, and in place, than I am about pandering to your petty little arguments over who's Homo sapiens superior. Now either you get this sorted out or I'll bring the director in on this. The forge operator grunted. Fine, but I still say I'm right. Regardless of which of us is right, the Admiral is correct. We need to sort this out. How about we get Dr. Corbin down here? The formula was originally his, said Bentley. The forge operator looked curiously at Bentley. I thought this was your alloy. The original formula was his. I simply developed the process to create it, and tweaked the formula slightly to aid in mass production, said Bentley. The forge operator pursed his lips and looked at Alfred, and then back at Bentley. Well then, tell you what. How about we call a truce until we can run this past the doctor? If the problems turn out to be mine, I'll apologize. If not, you're still a monkey. Bentley grinned slyly. Want a banana? I have plenty to spare.